Hello, everyone. Welcome to the channel. Today, our focus is going to be on the company NVR, ticker NVR. The company is one of the largest home builders in the United States, while also operating a mortgage banking and title service business. The stock is currently trading at around $7,000 a share, but with many brokerages offering fractional shares, it's possible to invest into the company with less. In this video, we'll look at NVR's financials, perform a stock valuation, and at the end of the video, we'll go into computer modeling to forecast the 52-week stock movement. So let's jump right into it. Here we have NVR's financials, and first thing I'll point out is this far right-hand column represents a trailing 12 months, so the first three quarters of 2023 and Q4 of 2022. And what we can see here across all these data points is consistent growth. And this is one of the best financial reports I've seen that indicates steady improving performance. And though trailing 12 months for revenue, net income, earnings per share, and free cash flow are down, but it's only down slightly compared to fiscal year 2022, which actually saw significant growth compared to 2021, with each of these data points growing at least 20%. And actually, right here, we can see free cash flow growing probably at least 50%. So it's not unreasonable to see NVR having these data points being slightly lower for the trailing 12 months, and it's only lower about 4 to 5% at most. And we'll be seeing next month when they release their fiscal year 2023 results, and possibly these may be a little higher or even higher than 2022. So I am looking forward to that. Another data point I just want to point out here is the share count. And we can see over the 10 years, the share count went from 4.44 million in 2014 down to just under 3.2 million for the trailing 12 months. So that's a decrease in shares of about or just more than 25%. And yes, they had that one little year in 2017 where it's a slight uptick, but still down overall and down nicely 25% or more. Another data point to point out here is his net profit margin. I like seeing companies at least 10% or higher, and we can see since 2018 they achieved that, going from 11% to almost 17% and growing each year. So very good data point right there. Well, let's move on and we'll perform the stock valuation. Here we have NVR's valuation, and we can see I previously performed the valuation back in April of 2023. So at that time, I valued it at just over $5,800, and I used a 90% margin of safety, bringing it to just under $5,300. And I will say back in October of last year, the stock actually dropped to about that price, and I thought about buying into it, and I just passed on it, which was a big mistake. But let's look at the current valuation, and we are going to perform a slight modification to this valuation in a moment. But right now, we're showing an intrinsic value just over $6,700, and with that same 90% margin of safety coming to $6,050. Now, this is based on a 10% short-term growth rate over the next 10 years with a 10% discount rate and a 3% long-term growth rate. Now, I am using 10% currently, but up here we can see the net CAGR for the net income over the last 10 years has been just under 22%. So I'm going to change this short-term growth rate to something a little bit higher, to 12%, not being too aggressive. And they are a home builder, and I do think home builders are going to be in demand for the next couple of years. So I don't think 12% is unreasonable. So let's change this to 12% and see how it changes the valuation. So with a 12% short-term growth rate, we see intrinsic value jumps up to just under $7,900, and with that 90% margin of safety, basically bringing it to $7,100. Now, as I mentioned, the stock is currently trading about $7,000, so slightly below my intrinsic value with a margin of safety. Now, am I going to buy into it? I admit I'm still on the fence here, and the only reason is because the current stock price at $7,000 is like the highest it's been. So it's at an all-time high, and I'm a little leery about buying stocks at an all-time high, but I am going to think about it. I may put a little money into it, hoping that it will drop even 5, hopefully 10%. But I definitely want to get into NVR. I'm just questioning if I want to buy in at their all-time high, even though it's slightly below what I have as an intrinsic value with a margin of safety. But something I am going to be thinking about. But now let's jump to the next segment and we'll look at the computer modeling to forecast the 52-week stock outlook. Here in the computer modeling software, I already ran the analysis using two methods. First, the M5 rule shown here, and the other ran the forest. And I'll point out the data is as of January 8th, and the far right hand column just represents the weekly stock price average for NVR, and the column right next to it is the S&P 500 ETF, and the other columns are just other various data points used for the analysis. Now, I've already copied the results for both methods and pasted it into Excel because it's a little easier to see there. Well, let's just take a quick look at the 52-week outlook for the M5 rule. And scrolling down, we can see out in beginning of January next year, it's actually showing a slight decline in the stock price at just over $6,800. And currently the stock's trading about $7,000. Well, let's take a quick look at Random Forest and then we'll go over into Excel. And same thing going looking at Random Forest, we can see here that as of January 8th, the stock was at just over $7,000. And scrolling down, same thing, 52 weeks. And we're actually seeing a quite bit of a decline for the random forest method, closing at just under $5,000. Well, let's jump over to Excel and we'll look at all this a little closer. So back in Excel, I already pasted all the data from the computer modeling software. And first thing I'll point out is this vertical red line. It represents this previous Monday, January 8th. And everything to the left of that vertical red line is the historical stock price, and everything to the right is the forecast. So let's look at a little history of the stock price first. And we can see back in 2009, the stock was trading at around $600. And it had a nice low run up going into 2016, 2017, where it crossed the $2,000 mark, and then jumped up in 2017, going over 3,000. We can see a slight pullback in 2018, getting close to $2,000, then ran up again in 2020 to about 4,000 and dropped off, falling below 3,000 in probably during COVID, and then ran up again in 2022, just below 6,000. Had a slight drop off later in the year, falling to 4,000 and ran up again going into 2023, crossing 6,000. Had that pullback in late 2023, and this is when I was mentioning that I thought about buying into, but I passed on it, and then shot up and recovered to where we are today, about $7,000. Now, I'm going to jump over to another tab where we'll look at the forecast a little closer. So looking at the M5 rule first, we're going to look at the projections to the right of that vertical red line. And what we're seeing here is this slow decline in the stock price over the next several months, going into probably June of this year, and then slightly ticking back up, getting just below $7,000, but dropping off again out in October of this year, and then recovering slightly and actually closing out the year slightly below where we are today. So around the $6,800 mark. And if this does play out, that would be about a loss of about 3 to 4% in the current stock price. So, I'm kind of bullish on the home building industry. So I'm not really sure if we're really going to see a pullback like this. I wouldn't mind buying into NVR at a much lower price. Even gets down to what it's showing here, about $6,500. But we'll see how things play out. Let's jump over now to Random Forest. That was a lot even more bearish than the M5 rule. So let's take a look at that one. So now we're in the forest. We could see it's showing that same decline, and actually steeper than what we saw in the M5 rule, at least for the initial few months of 2024, and continuing to drop off in stock price throughout the year, and actually closing out the year around $4,500. And if this does play out, that would be about a loss of 32%. Now, I really don't see a drop like this for NVR or even the home building industry. I think the only way this would happen if there was a significant collapse in the industry. So I'm really skeptical about the random forest projection. But let's just move on and look at the average. Now, for the average of the two methods, obviously it's going to have that same decline throughout the year. And we can see here that it's going into January 2025, projecting about $6,000, which would be a loss from where we are today of about minus 17, 18%. So I would have to say, throughout all the computer modeling projections I've done for various stocks, this is probably one of the more questionable ones, especially this random forest one. I highly doubt we're going to see this big of a drop off, minus 30%, especially for this industry, home building, unless something significant happens throughout 2024. So to recap, though the stock is trading slightly below my valuation, it is trading at an all-time high. And there's something about buying into a stock at an all-time high that gives me some concern. So I'm going to hold off and see if the stock falls, maybe about 10%, and then we'll look at buying into it at that time. And as we saw with the computer modeling, it is predicting a price drop anywhere from 5 to just over 30%. Although I believe that 30% price drop is a bit unlikely unless there's a significant event happening in the overall market or the home industry itself. So I hope you enjoyed this video and got some useful information. If so, consider subscribing, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.